1 week season, fam. La Familia, welcome back. My name is Mike Johnson, M Johnson 86, as I'm known in those DFS streets. We're coming to you, Fanduel edition, DFS Labs, week 8. A lot of teams on bye. Once again, a 10-game slate. NFL doing a nice job spreading things out, keeping these slates manageable for us. We are, ready to rock. A lot of high-profile teams are off the slate. There are some absolute smash spots that are on the slate this week, just with how some of these teams are really just falling apart. And some of these players are just, having really dominant seasons, and kind of a, perfect gathering of occurrences there, things coming together and making it kind of an interesting slate and a lot of dynamics to dive into, especially interesting on FanDuel for the fact that we are very dependent on touchdowns, especially at that higher end when you're spending a ton of salary. And we know touchdowns can be variant. So there's a lot to balance. There's a lot to think about. There's only 10 games, and there's a couple spots that it's pretty easy to wipe away. So I think it's probably going to be some of those spots maybe in the middle that kind of separate some things. So we'll get into all of that pretty shortly, and I'll bring in my co-host, Maximus. How we doing today?
Hello, partner. Hello, FanDuel fam. I'm doing good. Coming off of a week 7. Yeah, it's going by fast. The week 7 where I personally had another sweat in the 5-entry max. I was in third place till really late, finished at 13th. So some variance late kind of took me out off the mark a little bit, but it's good to continue to be consistent, and we can start to call this show the Quarterback Whisperer Show, I think, weekly, because we've been hitting it on the quarterback practice builds. We did Mahomes last week, and of course they did pull him out a little on the early side, but he was cooking, and so we've been in the right spots at that position at least. How about you? How was your week 7?
Yeah, it was very good actually. I was in the $250 the Blitz on FanDuel. Had a I'll actually pull it up here. I had a turn, or I only did one lineup in it this week, but it was it was live going into the afternoon. It had a pretty good start here. I'll just share the screen so people can see it. Okay, so ended up finishing in 263rd place, won $750. Through the early games, I had Jordan Addison, Devontae Smith mini, both of them at 6% and 5%, combined for a little over 50 points. I had Rashee Rice. He had 19.7. And then Mason Taylor. I was hopeful in the second half, he would just get some garbage stuff, but the Panthers offense wasn't able to do anything either. So it's not like they just started giving up easy stuff. I was actually, they'd flip to that game once in a while, and Tyrod Taylor was trying to force it down the field. I'm like, just take the 5-yard passes. But I digress. Then going into the afternoon, I was fairly live. I had the Broncos defense, who they were 28% owned. That was tough. I basically played 4 defenses. I played the Broncos, the Browns, the Patriots, and the Chiefs. On this one, I had the Broncos defense. And once the Patriots and Browns had smashed to such an extent, really needed them to kind of take off. And then I had Jonathan Taylor, and I played him with Justin Herbert and Kamani Vidal. Kind of, exactly how it played out was what I was looking for. It's just a matter of, I figured most people would play, like Vidal was 18%. He wasn't like low owned. But my idea was just try to soak up the whole Chargers offense, all of their scores. It turned out to be, I figured most people would play it, would be worried about the wide receivers. So I was like, well, I'll put a running back with Herbert. It turned out it was a non-receiver, but a different non-receiver that was the key you needed to have there. But yeah, it was a good week. But then, really what brought my week together was on DraftKings. Actually, I know this is a FanDuel show, but I took 15th in the flea flicker out of 83,000 entries. I was actually very live. I hit a Bo Nix Marvin Mims stack. There was some other Bo Nix rosters near the top, but I was live. I had that, and then I had Tucker Kraft going at only 5.9%. He was, only, like I said, 5.9% owned. Basically, if the Packers had settled for a field goal and that had gone to OT, I was sitting there thinking, like, if that game goes to OT, and then if the Giants, if they had made that extra point, then the Broncos field goal would have forced OT, would have had a very, very real shot, especially with Kraft and Mims being solo owned. Most of the Knicks stacks had Sutton near the top. So quite pleased with that. Again, a $5 entry, $1,000 for 15th place, was a decent bit back, but if that overtime had come, all it takes is kind of one play. I've seen that before. So put myself in position to win a large field tournament. And if the Gadsden stuff had been through Vidal and maybe Knicks didn't get there, I would have had a chance on the FanDuel one. So it was a very good week from that regard. Was pretty excited. I also wanted to touch on the FanDuel, the bottom-up build from last week, as is tradition now. Last week's winner, Japocalypse, I believe it's pronounced. So he had a 170.96 points. Again, for this tournament, you have to leave 5,500 in salary to win. So he had a Bo Nix, Cortland Sutton stack with Judkins, Ramondre at running back, low-owned Chris Olave, and in there, Jordan Addison was high-owned in this tournament because of the salary structure. And then he had the Patriots defense at low ownership as well. So congratulations to him. Of course, you can find the link to this week's bottom-up build, week 8, in the YouTube, the description below this video. So check that out. And yeah, one other thing I wanted to touch on quick. The last week's video, there was a commenter who talked underneath about us not, like, we didn't touch the Cowboys Commanders game. And that was obviously, like, ended up being a spot that a lot of people wanted to get to. I really didn't. I ended up that one roster that I showed there, I had Javonte Williams on it. He's the way I kind of played that mostly on FanDuel. Had some Lamb as well, but mostly was just some Javonte. And otherwise, I wasn't really on it. And, it's funny, there's 66 points played out in the game, and it wasn't like you needed to have anyone from it. So just another lesson there when you're building for tournaments. The points can be scored in various ways, and not to be afraid to take a stand or to you can build a roster without a certain game. Each game is independent of itself. So just wanted to touch on that quick.
Yeah, I mean, some game environments, even though points are going to be scored, the offenses are spread out. Whereas you can have other games where there's similar game totals, but the offenses are more concentrated, and it's probably strategically or theory-wise a better spot to go to. I do want to mention this because this is rare for me. I actually had a large field team. So remember, Tony was texting me. He saw it. It was a Jalen Hurts team, ironically, in the 50% overlay, 20 entry max. I was in 8th place with CeeDee Lamb, who CeeDee Lamb actually was cooking in the first half. And then, of course, the game got out of hand. So I dropped down from there. But
that was the other thing with that lineup that I had was I had Lamb in the flex, and obviously he shut down. There was of the 14 people ahead of me, there was I want to say he was on like 2 of the rosters, 2 or 3. But so, like, him alone wouldn't have won it for me, but a little bit of second half production, could have made a few grand difference, which would have been nice. But 231, still can't complain about it. But yeah, to your point, you probably those guys shut it down. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, it was just that was a good large field team. I'm more of a small field guy typically, but I had been playing that 20 entry max because they keep doing the 50% overlay every week. I noticed that is not the case this week, so I think they've reached their limit on offering that contest. But I digress.
Yeah, and there's it's and to the greater point on that game, the Cowboys were expensive enough that they could score 44 points and none of their guys became like a guy you had to have, right? It's not like all their guys were 6K, 6 to 7K. And if they score 40, if they score 35 points, somebody's going to be optimal because they're just going to have such a massive score for their salary. They were expensive enough. And then the Commanders side, we just didn't really know where they were going to go. And we had that uncertainty around Tebow and McLaurin early in the week too when we build. So it was interesting. And, I like looking back at last week's, even after we recorded, they added Rashee Rice to the player pool. From that lens, once he was in the player pool and then he was kind of a pretty reasonable salary, like I think the play would have been just exactly how you built it, would have been awesome large field roster. And then maybe find a way to get Rice in there for a smaller field just because you don't have to worry so much about the overall, how common this roster is on a smaller field stuff. So with all of that said, I'll pull it up and we can get into this week's build. I'm curious to see where you go here because I think there's a lot of interesting dynamics and, just there's a lot going on here this week. And like I said in the intro, touchdowns on Fanduel, play such a huge part. So it makes getting a little bit further away from, the obvious a little bit easier to do sometimes, I think. But I'm curious where you go.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'd like to take the lead at quarterback and running back, if I may, this week.
Yeah, we're just living in it, buddy.
I want to have fun discovering with you how we're going to build the rest of this team.
I'm just relaxing on the dock here, okay? You just tell me what to click.
Gotcha. I guess it doesn't matter what contest because we're pretty agnostic of that. So I'm in the 5 entry max touchdown, which is my usual contest. But so I want to start with the two highest price, or two of the three. So it's an interesting week. We have a couple of elite quarterbacks that are returning to the fold, either from bye week or from injury, although we're not quite sure about one of them yet, but he's probably returning. And then we got the 3 stud running backs that have just been torching the NFL this season, and Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson, and Christian McCaffrey. I think McCaffrey probably has the toughest matchup of the 3, having to go to Houston. But I want to start this build, just get them in. Bijan Robinson and Jonathan Taylor at the top, 10,000 and 10,200. Obviously very high priced, but both these guys are in spots where they could easily get 30 points. They could easily still do, even at that high of a salary, 3x their salary. Bijan's at home, in the dome against a hapless Dolphins team at this point. Jonathan Taylor at home against Tennessee, who he's historically shredded anyway. And the touchdown regression is interesting on these two. JT's been just spitting out touchdowns like getting out of bed. And Bijan only has 2 rushing touchdowns on the year, amazingly. So I think there's some regression coming that way probably this week. So I want to jam them in.
Well, Bijan's got 4. He's got 2 rushing, 2 receiving. So, but only 2 rushing. You're right there.
Right. Yeah. He's got the receiving, which is always, a plus anyway. I actually think, and I'm kind of foreshadowing, this is one of those unique weeks against my usual better judgment that 2 tight ends could be in play here. A tight end in the flex to kind of open up some value to have a balanced team with these 2 guys. But we're going to start at quarterback this week, and this is a big caveat because I haven't seen a practice report today yet. So, but to be honest with you, even the backup I think would be viable. Let's go with Michael Penix Jr., of the Atlanta Falcons, $6,800, returning home, kind of a pairing with Bijan. And also, it's funny, me and you are seeming to be the only fans of this guy in the tight end spot, but I also have a kind of want to stack him with Bijan and Kyle Pitts here at 5,300. Kyle Pitts has quietly been getting more involved in this offense. He had 10 targets last week, 7 receptions. He's definitely produced in a few different spots this year. I think this is a block of players facing Miami at home, coming off a defeat where the 49ers definitely went man coverage on Michael Penix, and it's probably something I'm sure the Dolphins may try to do. But per Fantasy Points data, cover 3 single zone coverage so far this year has been the most frequently used coverage of the Miami Dolphins secondary, and that also happens to be the best coverage that Michael Penix operates against, just for reference. And so you have that. I know that he has some minor injuries, and they say that he's day-to-day. So if he were to miss, you do have Kirk Cousins at 6,000, who I still think could run that offense at home against Miami at min price. But I tend to think Penix will probably play, but the practice report today which we don't have access to yet because it's Wednesday morning, will probably shed some light on that. But for now, I'm going to say Penix, Bijan, Kyle Pitts as a player block against Miami. Put Jonathan Taylor in the running back 2 spot. And then if we do that, that kind of leaves us 5,900. We'll probably have to figure out the defense. I do have a defense in mind as leverage off the other stud running back potentially. So some ideas floating in my head, but I will leave it at here and then throw it back to you and see what you think.
Yeah, I don't mind it at all. Kyle Pitts, they face the Dolphins, who actually are 29th in the league in DVOA against the tight end position. Now, I mean, to be fair, they're like 25th or worse against every position, so they're just bad. So it's not like it's not like that's their weak spot, right? Just they are a weak spot. But to that point, we kind of saw it like when you see these spots. This is a spot where, let me see here so I don't misquote it. The Falcons are projected to score 26 points. They're at home. The Michael Penix home road splits have been pretty significant. Had 15 points against the Bills, 23 against the Commanders, 24 against the Buccaneers. So it's not like those are doormat type teams, so getting 20-ish points and kind of just locking up, you do 2 things here. As long as Algier doesn't steal stuff, but even if he does, it's probably late and they've probably already scored 4 times. So Penix and Bijan probably accumulate for all of that, unless you get vultured. And to your point, if you're doing, multiple lineups, I might, if you're going to be heavy on Bijan and have some Penix, just throwing 1 in there with Algier, kind of, it's highly unlikely that the Falcons do not play well in this spot. I'm not a fan of like covering all your bases most of the time, but I do think that's kind of a multi-entry way of handling it. Just because if Algier, he's going to be sub 5% owned, even though I'm sure I won't be the only one who kind of mentions him this week. He's 5,900. But either way there, I think Penix is going to have a solid game, or Cousins, like you said. The Dolphins team seems like it's close to imploding. And then Pitts, again, like you said, you got to find some cheap, you got to find some salary savings here. And this is a spot that it certainly makes sense to include Pitts. So where to go from there then? You kind of touched on Lamar Jackson. You talked about the quarterback, and I think everyone kind of expected he would just be back this week. And now it seems that that's kind of up in the air. He didn't practice Monday, so a little iffy there. When I first started looking, I assumed he would be back. So I really like the Ravens defense this week. if they are able to get out ahead. I think the Bears, they started out so poorly. They blew that game Monday night to the Vikings, and then they got routed by the Lions in week 2. But since then, they handled the Cowboys at home. In the game, Lamb went out, and the Cowboys had a bunch of turnovers. Then they've beaten the Raiders. They beat the Commanders in a game where they basically handed it to them, and they beat the Saints. So it's not like they've won 4 straight, but it's not like they're like clipping off like high-end teams consistently. So if the Ravens get healthier off the bye and then get Lamar back, I would really like that Ravens defense. So we'll just put that in there for now. We can switch it up later if we want. But if we were to build this lineup and then Lamar ends up being out, it's real easy. You could just switch to the Bears defense too, because the Ravens without Lamar, their offense does not look very good. The other aspect here is, so we've built heavily around Bijan, and then it's like, okay, so we've got Jonathan Taylor. How do we want to play this? So there's a couple ways you could play it. You could play the expensive Colts defense, which it's been very profitable if you've been targeting Cam Ward throughout the season. But the other way to do this, obviously we need, we've got $6,000 in salary only for 4 spots here. And so the other way to play this would be to look at if Jonathan Taylor is paying off his $10,200 salary, how is he doing that? Like, what is the, because he's got 4 games of 30 plus points. So that we basically need another one. Well, in those games, he had over 200 yards against Denver, and he had 3 touchdowns in each of the other 3 games. So basically that's what we're looking for. Like, you need him to really smash. So what we can't have happen, in my opinion, like, I wouldn't play Taylor with the Colts defense, because if the Colts defense is really smashing that much, I don't know that Taylor is. It's not like the Colts are 3,800, right? They're 4,900. So, like, if they're smashing that much, if they're getting 20 points, he's probably, topping out at 20 to 25. They're going to let him coast and rest in the second half. So I don't usually like taking players from teams that have such low totals. The Titans are 2 touchdown underdogs. But in this situation and on this build, I think Chimere Dike makes a lot of sense at only 4,900. And some people might think this is just, box score chasing, because last week he had 4 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown. I think he had most or all of it in the first half, actually. But Tyler Lockett requested his release. They had been kind of splitting slot snaps. DK had overtaken him slightly, but he's the most explosive wide receiver kind of on the team. Their perimeter guys, Calvin Ridley, don't know what's going on with him, if he'll be back this week. Alec Iomanner, he's kind of like a full-time guy regardless, and then it's like Van Jefferson takes Ridley's spot when Ridley is out, or they shuffle around. But the slot has just been Lockett or DK. Lockett's gone, so let's add DK at 4,900. Kind of an explosive guy, and just tells the story of, he could get there late as like these easy targets. And they've got, now it's just the young guys, right? They've got Lockett out of there. I wouldn't be surprised if they move on from Ridley pretty quick. So just, they're going to keep playing late. They've got to develop these guys. So he'll get targets late, but also he could be what pushes Taylor early. He's got that explosive skill set where if he does catch another long first half pass, that's the difference between a game being 20-3 at halftime or 20-10. So I like that correlation play, and that opens up a lot for us. 3 spots left with just under 6,400 per spot. So what say you on our next move?
Yeah, I definitely see where you're theory-wise with DK. He will be the starting slot receiver, most likely. Ravens defense, I'm sure, is probably going to get some pieces back from injury and having the bye week to maybe kind of regroup and get some things figured out on that side. I will counter with a defense and a player that are very close to that price range. As Honorable mentioned, we don't have to change it, but I love Marvin Mims at 5,200 this week for the Denver Broncos. They have a 27-point team total and the highest game total on the slate. And of course, the Broncos defense is good, but the Cowboys are just, with all their weapons back, it's a team where I just think they're going to have to use Marvin Mims and deploy him maybe even more than the usual shuffle, the Peyton shuffle. And then at defense, the only, if you will, stud running back that we don't have on this lineup is, of course, Christian McCaffrey. And my thought was maybe leverage off of him with the 49ers defense at 4,000, facing a Houston Texans team with a horrible offensive line. Nico Collins will most likely be out getting a concussion on a Monday Night Football, so they have a short week. And so I like the 49ers in that spot as well. Those would be, or to what you just did, maybe even add Mims with DK, and then that frees up salary for the last two spots. So that would be kind of a counter or
let's do that. Let's go ahead with I've got Mims in there now. We'll swap the Ravens to the 49ers. I like that kind of thought process of there's three high-priced running backs that will all probably be popular. So if we're betting on a specific two of them, we can kind of bet on McCaffrey in a different way. We do like his spot and his team situation this week. But maybe it's just a lower scoring game like they had last week against the Falcons, right? I was a little. They've lost Fred Werner and Nick Bosa, two key parts of their defense, but Robert Saleh does a nice job. They're well coached. They scheme up really well. They're facing DeMeco Ryans, their former defensive coordinator, took over when I believe when Saleh left. But yeah, I mean, that Texans offense their offensive line is probably the worst in the league. And now we'll see the status of Christian Kirk. There's no way Nico plays after a Monday night concussion. And then we'll see on Christian Kirk, but and they don't really have much of a running game. So, like we saw with the Commanders last week, if you take, too many pieces away from some of these teams, it's like, the offense just implodes. So I like that. I like that a good amount. And then, I like Mims. Obviously he was on my high scoring roster last week. He's got an explosive skill set. His ceiling outcomes, he's got a 13 on FanDuel, or 12.8 and 17.5 this year on FanDuel. But, we've seen it last year. 20-point games. I think he had one at or near 30 in week 17. So let's go ahead with that.
Yeah, it sounds good. And then with two spots left, I'm curious how you may want to finish this. I have one idea off the top of my head, and that is to make this Atlanta shell a complete game stack. Put Devon Achane in the flex. And that actually, with salary left over, there's shockingly some decent receiver options with 5,700 left between Rashid Shaheed, Tez Johnson for the Bucks. We know that Evans sadly is going to be gone for the rest of the regular season. I don't think Godwin. I'm pretty sure with Irving and Godwin, it would be shocking if either of them played week 8 with the week 9 bye. I'm assuming they're going to keep them out until after the bye and then have them fresh for week 10. So Tez Johnson actually looked really good on Monday night. Completely different frame and from a receiver like Evans, but viable at those prices. Or don't have to do that. We can maybe try to fit in a higher price receiver to kind of lead that receiver core and then figure out the flex from there. What says you?
Yeah. I think what I like here is let's go with T. Higgins. I like T. Higgins at home against the Jets. He's at 7K. We had 6,800 per spot with 2 spots left. So if we go with Higgins, Sauce Gardner had, I believe, a concussion for the Jets last week. Would expect he would shadow Jamar Chase if he is able to play. If he is not able to play, then It'll be I don't know what the Jets are going to do. Like their defense, the Joe Flacco's made such a quick impact on the Bengals. They're projected for 25.5 points this week. That number, could go up once we get official news on on Sauce Gardner. I don't know if Garrett Wilson will be back this week. It'll just be an interesting spot. But I like Higgins. We've seen wide receiver twos when Sauce is shadowing. The ball kind of gets funneled to them. And if Sauce isn't there, they're just going to move the ball so well, I think, that I think that's a good spot. And then, at 6,600, the guy I'm going to add in another late game guy would be Alvin Kamara. Kendre Miller tore his ACL, had been kind of busting into Kamara's workload in recent weeks, but he is eliminated from the picture. Kamara ended up playing, I believe it was 47 of, let me see here. I had it written down. 47 of 56 snaps for Kamara last week, 14 of the 16 running back touches, all of them except one once Miller was out. So in that game, the Saints, that they are projected for 22 points in this spot against the Bucs, who are pretty beat up and playing on a short week. So it's a spot where I'm not overly high on Kamara overall, but I think for this 1 week, this kind of sets up pretty nicely at him at home in the Dome, facing the Bucs. The one discussion I wanted to talk about was I brought up T. Higgins, but I could also see a couple options if we wanted to go different at wide receiver instead of Higgins would be George Pickens. Kind of the same thing. They're playing Denver. If Patrick Surtain, if he shadows CeeDee Lamb, which I would not be surprised if he does, you see that first place next to Pickens for opponent rank against. But they played last week the Giants without Malik Neighbors. Before that, they played the Jets, who they couldn't complete a pass to anyone. They played the Eagles, who actually the Eagles receivers did pretty well against them. And then they played the Bengals, who obviously have good receivers, but Jake Browning was under center. They gave up a big game to Quentin Johnston. Daniel Jones had success against them in week 2. So it's I think Patrick Surtain is the real deal. And I think their pass rush is very good. But if they shadow with if they shadow CeeDee Lamb, I think George Pickens could have a big game there. And then with Kamara involved in the flex, instead of Higgins, we could go with Egbuka at only 7,500. So we could make either of those moves from what I've got up here, and then adjust our defense just because, defense is variant. That's easy to, just move off of if you want. So I'll leave it up to you. Do you want to stick with what I've got? Do you want to make any adjustments there?
Gotcha. Yeah, I like both routes. T. Higgins, even though it's a small sample size, we've seen that he can be effective with Joe Flacco at quarterback, Joe Flacco a downfield passer, so he's definitely usable. I like the Kamara call as well. I think we're down to Devin Neal being the backup to Kamara with Miller being out for the rest of the year. So I could definitely see going that route. And then, the Pickens call, that's great as well with the Surtain possible shadow. One other shout out at flex, if you did go Pickens, you do have salary to potentially put Tet McMillan in there. And with Andy Dalton at quarterback, I actually think Tet can be effective with Dalton at quarterback, playing the Bills, where they're going to have to, the Bills are coming off a bye. They're going to be looking to trounce them. But Carolina's been relatively competitive most of the season. So another route we could go, and then, whoever the 4:00 guy is, put it in the flex. But I like both routes. I definitely see a case to be made for those choices. I'm fine with however you want to finish it.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just looking here. let's
We're giving you guys multiple entry ideas. So, oh, I wanted to say one more thing, if I could, about the. Go ahead.
Let's do this. So, the thing with we've got DK and Mims both in this lineup who are a little bit lower probability bets. Pitts too. Like we're forced to get a little thin at these places. But we found ways. I like involving Pickens because then all of those all the ones that it requires a little bit more of a leap of faith, they're all correlated, right? You put Mims, correlate him with Pickens, etc. I do think I don't hate Tet's matchup at all. But I think I would prefer if we get Pickens in as well, and then we could go with this Giants defense at only 3,300. They do a great job rushing the passer. I actually kind of like Philly this week, but again, we're just paying down and we're opening things up. And now we've got with Pickens and Higgins, they're both we've gone into the I don't like getting too in the weeds with cornerback matchups in most spots, but I think the Jets with Gardner and the Broncos with Surtain, and then Higgins and Pickens both being like very talented players. I think that those specific type spots actually do matter. So let's do this. I mean, we can switch. Honestly, I don't care. Any defense under 3,400 will fit for us if you want to go a different direction. But I like getting just more like really talented players that like if they scored 2 touchdowns, no one would blink an eye.
Right. If we were going to go to the lower range, I'm not opposed to the Saints defense. I mean, Baker looked kind of out of sync on Monday night with all the injuries and trying to have to figure things out. Saints are at home. They're an up-paced, scrappy team. I think it's viable enough at 3,000. That frees up even a little more salary. But in that range, of course, if we were to go there, I could see a case to be made for maybe the Saints at home against a Bucs team that's depleted in the receiving core. Although Baker ultimately is obviously a really good quarterback, but he definitely probably looked the most out of sync I'd seen him with his passing on a Monday night. And so, maybe you get a turnover or a strip sack or something like that. But I could see that on the lower range. But otherwise, I'm fine with how we have it.
All right. Well, your final call: Saints or Giants?
Let me see here. So if we go Saints, what does that leave us with? $400. I guess we would have the option, maybe for the sake of time. Let's just stick with the Giants, and because I like the Higgins and the Pickens and the flex call. So for the sake of time, I'm fine with just sticking with where it's at, and then we still have $100 to maybe play around with in late swap.
Okay. Let's just leave the Saints in, to your point. And because that's one more late swap position that we've got on the table there. So then we've got the Taylor DK core, that mini and the Mims Pickens mini plus the defensive spot all available. And it's fine. 400 is not egregious to leave on the table. I think that's fine. So let's do that. And that way, just more flexibility with whatever we want to do, however we want to move up. Because if you were to late swap there, it would probably be, moving off of Taylor, which would open up a ton of salary. So at that point, maybe you do make that Taylor swap and you go from the Saints to the Colts, that sort of thing. So, let's do that. Let's leave the Saints for now and roll with that.
Sounds good.
All right. So for those listening on the podcast feed, the final roster we've got here is Michael Penix Jr. at quarterback, correlated with Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts. The other running back spot is Jonathan Taylor. Our wide receivers are Chimere Dike, who is correlated with Jonathan Taylor, of course. Then we have Marvin Mims, and George Pickens mini correlation and T. Higgins at the final wide receiver spot. And then the New Orleans Saints defense at min price, $3,000, facing this Baker Mayfield-led Bucs team that is heading into their bye week and is the walking wounded, playing on a short week. I like kind of where we ended up there, and it'll be an interesting week. Of course, this is Wednesday. We've got 3 days. We don't even have practice reports yet for today. So a lot will change. A lot will change over the next, 72 hours before we really get into things. But I've talked about this in our workshop stuff for Inner Circle members. Like, sometimes all that noise late in the week can affect you too much. So I like where our heads are at, how we built this kind of and kind of put things together. Any parting shots, final thoughts?
I was going to say this earlier, kind of rewinding with the Falcons shell. Falcons released Ray McLeod as well yesterday, so they're pretty thin in the receiving core. I'm curious if they're going to make before the trade deadline, kind of go after a receiver. They would be a candidate for that, but I think that only benefits somebody like Kyle Pitts, who's starting to roll in that offense, just for reference.
Yeah, and he led the team. He actually did lead the team in targets last week. He had 9 targets he had 9 out of 31 targets for a 29% target share. It was a season high in targets. As far as where are we at? As far as snaps, he played 53 of 65 snaps, ran a route on almost every one of Penix's dropbacks. So, he's an integral part of that offense. Even with Mooney back now, things have kind of condensed, especially in the passing game with him, London, Mooney, and Bijan. So, he fits perfectly. Like, if he's hitting, it's not like the Falcons are going to score 20 points and Pitts is like the focal point, right? If he's having a big enough game, their offense is probably smashing. So I love the idea of playing him with at least one of Bijan or Penix, and playing him with both is even more unique. So good stuff.
Concur. Agreed.
All right. Sounds good. Check us out, oneweekseason.com. Check out the Fanduel bottom-up build in the description. Join us on Discord. Get in. The Binks channel was popping this week. We were all over Bo Nix and Justin Herbert. And by the end of this week, we will hopefully have the keys to week 8. So as always, thank you for joining us. Thanks for spending your Wednesday afternoon or whenever you're watching this. Stay up to date on everything. And we will see you next week. Same time, same place. Peace.
1 week season.